Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the February 1st meeting of the Architectural Review Board of the City of Palo Alto. The first item is oral communications, a time to speak to matters not on the agenda. And I have two cards. The first one is from David Carnahan. And for the benefit of the tape, that's Carnahan. Oh, sorry, I forgot the roll call. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, Chair Firth,
Yes.
Vice Chair Balte,
Present.
Board Member Thompson,
Present.
Board Member Liu,
Present.
Board Member Guyer. Thank you.
I guess I'm 0 for 2 on that. All right, now we'd like to hear from Mr. Carnahan.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Firth and board members. David Carnahan in the City Clerk's office. I'm here to talk with you today about board and commission recruitment. The city is currently looking to fill 1 term on the Historic Resources Board, 3 on the Human Relations Commission, 3 on the Public Art Commission, and 2 on the Utilities Advisory Commission. As you know, these are great ways to both give back to your community and help shape the future of Palo Alto, continuing to make it a fantastic place to both live and work. So I'll be giving each of you a flyer, and your assignment is to think of at least 2 members of the community that you think would be a good fit for one of these boards. Reach out to them and encourage them to apply. Applications are due March 20th at 4:30 p.m. and they're available on the City Clerk's webpage, cityofpaloalto.org/clerk. So again, we're currently recruiting for the Historic Resources Board, the Human Relations Commission, the Public Art Commission, and the Utilities Advisory Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And now we also have a request from Jeff Levinsky. 3 minutes.
Good morning, board members and staff. I wanted to speak today at Open Mic about the PAN Zoning Committee. PAN is part of Palo Alto Neighborhoods, which is a citywide organization that's existed for a number of years, in which neighborhood leaders work together on issues, and we have a committee that specifically focuses on zoning and planning issues. And part of what we look at are the problems in the city like traffic, parking, housing, office imbalance, and ways that our existing laws can help us solve these problems if properly applied. At your most recent hearing on the project for 203 Force, the old Cardinal Cleaners, I pointed out that the project was underparked. And I believe Board Member Balte echoed that concern about the project. You were then informed by city staff that the project was not underparked. I filed subsequently a code enforcement action with the city and was told again that the project was not underparked. I persisted in that and brought more people involved to hear about it, and the city then responded that indeed the project was underparked and that they were going to work with the owner. The city didn't quite have the right number of parking spots, but we got that resolved, and so I don't know the final disposition of it. The moral is that persistence is needed, that sometimes the answers you're given aren't correct, and we appreciate your perseverance in trying to get the right information and making the right things happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Levinsky. And then again, this is really not for the benefit of the tape, but the benefit of the transcriber, who often has trouble spelling names from members of the public. Jeff spells his first name with a J, and it's Levinsky. All right. Are there any agenda changes, additions, or deletions? Okay. City official reports. Any comments from staff?
No comments.
I have one. Looking at our next meeting, that's page 10. Could you update us on what we're actually likely to have on February 15th?
Yes, thank you. The items on the 15th, there are a few items that have dropped off, and so it will just be 375 Hamilton, the downtown garage, that will be heard on February 15th. 2 of those, the other items there have been likely moved to March 1st, and some of the March 1st items will have to drop off.
And are we expecting to hear the Verizon and AT&T applications on March 1st or not? Or do we not yet know?
We're not sure at this moment. We can give you an update next time on that.
Okay, so we might be planning for lunch on the first long meeting. Also, the board had a lot of comments on 375 Hamilton, the downtown public parking garage. You might like to take a look at that and see if you think your intentions were clear, because I'm sure this is going to be a high-stakes hearing. Okay, that's all I have on that. Thank you for your help. Our first public hearing item is somewhat unusual, since it involves a 25 million square foot parcel, which is bigger than we usually see. This is a public hearing on 2775 Embarcadero, that would make a recommendation on the city's request for approval of a major architectural review for a master sign program for interpretive and educational signage at the Lucy Evans Nature Interpretive Center and along the Bay Trail, connecting to the Cooley Landing Educational Center in East Palo Alto. There's also a request for a sign exception. This is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Equality Act. And may we have the staff report, please, unless anybody has a conflict to declare.
Hearing no conflicts. Good morning, board members. Claire Hodgkins, project planner. So the proposed project before you today, as you noted, is a request for a master sign program to allow the installation of signage at the Baylands Nature Preserve. So the sign program allows for installation of interpretive educational signage at the Lucy Evans Nature Interpretive Center, as well as the adjacent boardwalk, as well as the trail connecting the educational center to the Cooley Landing Educational Center in East Palo Alto. And this sign program comes with a request for more freestanding signs on a single site than is typically allowed. This table gives a really quick summary of kind of the general locations of signs and types of signage and number of different types of those signs that are proposed. One thing I will note is that the staff report was very specific on the exact number of signs that might be proposed. If the board is open to it, staff would prefer to kind of round up with respect to the proposed number of signs to create a more general number instead of such a specific number. This slide just kind of shows the project site. In yellow, you can see the trail along which the signs would be located and the Baylands Boardwalk along which they would be located. In red, you can see the outline of the parcel. And this slide is just to show you how the signage plan would continue into East Palo Alto as it passes over San Francisco Creek. So key considerations for the board today include any comments you may have on the number of signs, the sign height or size, and the materials and color of the different signs proposed. And staff would recommend that you approve the recommend approval of the proposed project, including the sign exception, to the Director of Planning and Community Environment, subject to findings, or based on findings and subject to conditions of approval. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Any questions from the board of staff before we hear from the public, though I have no cards?
I just want to note that the applicant also has a very short presentation if you'd like to hear from
That aspect of the city? Great. You have 10 minutes.
There we go. Good morning, board members. It's John Aiken from the Community Services Department, City of Palo Alto. This project came up because, let me click my right things, because we teach at the Baylands Nature Center kids that come out for K through 5th grade classes out there. They're mostly 3rd and 4th grade classes. And last year we had a renovation of the Lucy Evans Nature Center, and it caused us to look for another location to teach. And so we approached East Palo Alto and ended up utilizing the Cooley Landing Education Center, and it sort of opened our eyes to both the community there, the needs for education, the needs for signage and engagement of the public, but also the proximity between the Cooley Landing Education Center and the Lucy Evans Nature Center. There are also a couple of other influences. One is that we had funding for signage on the Lucy Evans Nature Center deck. The Baylands is being rebuilt, but there is no funding for the interpretation on the boardwalk. And so we thought we would seek funding by combining all of these things together, uniting the two communities, and fund a program that links Cooley Landing Nature Center to Lucy Evans Nature Center, and funds the signage on the boardwalk. We've come up with a lot of conceptual messages along that trail. As Claire said, we're really going to choose about 15 locations along this trail, working with the open space personnel, other public meetings as we go through design. This is really conceptual and design at this point, not finished designing it. It's really important to the rangers that we stay out of their mowing range, and that it's within an area that they can maintain the levees and things like that. So there are a lot of restrictions. We're aware of that, and we're aware of the stakeholders that we need to work with to choose those locations carefully. We've come up with concepts for two types of trail signage designs. One is there's a wooden standard that's used out there now. They're painted Sandy Hook gray, but we've also come up with a steel sign that is a little bit more cleaner and elegant, that is used in other parts of the Bay Trail. And so we looked at Bay Trail design standards. We looked at design standards for the Baylands Nature Preserve, and these fit within the guidelines for both of those. We also designed railings for the boardwalk as it's being rebuilt, so that the railings will take these standard signs, and these railings are already installed at Lucy Evans Nature Center. So this is the funded piece. These signs that you're going to actually, the examples you're going to see today really came out of the design process for these signs on the Lucy Evans Nature Center. These are the locations on the boardwalks for groupings of signs that talk about the various phenomena that we've pointed out on these locations. Gone out and mapped. The idea is that we're trying to put in front of people a sign that answers their questions about what they're looking at right in front of them. And so they're very short, they're meant to be short, simple signs. We've also done them in two languages, because for linking East Palo Alto and Palo Alto, it's important to have, there are a lot of English language learners in East Palo Alto, and so doing it in Spanish and English. It's a standard that we have at the Lucy Evans Nature Center now. This is an example of the signage with an illustration. We're trying to involve a number of different media to engage people in different ways, because there are all kinds, the people learn in all kinds of different styles and different ways. Here's an example of a sign that uses photographs. Example of a sign that uses tactile, this one's a bronze impression of the leaf patterns of the salt marsh plants that are out there. But we're also trying to find other ways of engaging people. Glass viewing panels were designed for the boardwalk. They're already installed at the Nature Center. This allows us to focus special views and call out things that you can see through them. We're looking at designing interactive elements for the boardwalk in particular, such as sediment wheels. The whole reason the marsh is there, and it changes over time, including with global climate change, the rising of the sea level. The sediments resettle, and the marsh will adjust to that, and we can talk about that by having people engage with the sediments. Interactive elements such as sliders to show the types of organisms that live at high tide and low tide. And then touchable examples for kids to be able to see models really of what lives in the mud underneath them. And so with that, I open it up for questions.
Are there questions? Yes.
By how many signs does the proposal surpass the allowed?
There's a range of there. Do you want to give the range?
So typically, the sign code allows for 1 sign per frontage. So it's a little bit unclear. Typically, there's 4 frontages, so generally around 4 signs. So we've made an interpretation to do a sign exception because we weren't totally clear in our code what would be allowed. But typically on a site it would be 4. This is a little bit atypical of a site because 1, it's a very irregular frontage, and 2, as Board Member Firth mentioned, this is a 25 million square foot site, which is extremely rare. And so in that case, and as outlined in the findings, we feel it's appropriate to allow for more as designed.
Okay, I have a speaker card on this item from Martin Bernstein, Bernstein. Welcome, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Nguyen, and Chair Firth, and other board members and staff. I'm Martin Bernstein. I totally support the idea of some kind of connection through signage with the Cooley Landing site. I've been out to that site. I was there when it actually still had the original boat mechanisms as when it was used as a true landing, and that was part of the route to get over to Dixon Landing before the Dumbarton Bridge. Anyway, I've been out there, and I've been out on some of the jogging trails out there, and it really feels right now like, oh, what's this bridge? And oh, what's this trail over here? And it really feels like a little disconnect between Palo Alto Bayland area and East Palo Alto Bayland area. So to get those connected, I think is a great community outreach thing to do. I know, and I know when I was out there, it'd feel like, oh, am I trespassing? It wasn't clear if I should be out there or not. But having the trails there makes it a lot more friendlier thing to do, and a great community thing to do, and a great way to communicate and connect the two communities even more than they are right now. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to speak to us. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this item? Seeing nobody, I'll close the hearing. So no more questions, so comments? Want to start at the left?
I have one quick
Oh,
question.
you have a question.
So I was just curious about the number of signs, and so do you have something timed out? Like it's like a 2-minute walk between signs with kids or something? Is there what was the logic of the number of signs?
First of all, we looked at phenomena, and we mapped out what questions people had in their minds about what's happening here. And then we figured we really didn't want signs any closer than, say, a football field length apart. And so that's where we set some parameters. But as I say, we haven't actually really designed these locations in the final signage. So we would go through that process. But the idea is to have them sparse enough to that the place doesn't feel cluttered with signs, but to also engage people along their path so they recognize that there is a habit here, there's a pattern.
Thank you.
Any other questions? How long is the trail between the two centers, between Cooley and?
Approximately 2.5 miles, or 2.1 miles.
2.1 miles, thank you. We're ready to deliberate, right?
Let me
Yes, Robert.
Basically, I mean, I like the way it is. Usually we get in here to worrying about signage where you're trying to sell something or advertise something. This is basically an educational experience, so I can approve it the way it is.
Alec?
Yes, I can also recommend approval of this project. I've been out there many times by bicycle, and I would say I think my take on it is that there are more people from East Palo Alto using the trail than there are from Palo Alto. That's my unscientific sense. And then I think I agree with Mr. Bernstein is that when I've gone, the part that goes around the airport, this feels kind of isolated because just because of the airport. And it seems like that's like the perfect place for signage. I have some concerns that there are too many signs, but when I looked at the dimensions of what you're proposing, they're so small that I'm not, that I think that takes care of it. And I think having more educational opportunities there makes sense. I did those tours when I was in 3rd grade in Palo Alto, so I remember going out to the on the boardwalks and stuff, and it was great.
Esma.
Yeah, I can echo my fellow board members' sentiments. That seems like a nice project. I also initially had some concerns that it might be too many, but it seems that given the size, it's appropriate for the area.
Peter.
I can support the project as it's presented, and I can make the findings presented in the staff report, and particularly can also make the findings for the sign exception. I think it's a great project. You're doing a good job. Thank you.
This is one of the easiest exceptions you've ever given us. So is there a number, I think that it looks to me like a well-designed plan. The description of it seems to give you needed flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances in science. What number do you think is appropriate? Are you happy with what you have, or do you want something more within limits?
What do you want to do, like a not to exceed number or something at the?
You have up to 57.
I think the other thing.
I think we've, oh, sorry, go ahead if you were going to say something. I was just going to note, I think in the staff report, we noted 97 total signs, but just to accommodate for, I believe there are a handful of signs out there, and just to accommodate for flexibility in the future, if you guys would be open to it, I would recommend maybe saying up to, 125 or so signs might be appropriate. Just to kind of cover the program overall.
Alex, did you have a comment?
I have a question for staff. In our conditions of approval, is there any limit on geographic boundaries within the site? Or I understand that the scope is between the two educational centers, but if we approve it, are we saying that you could do them all over the Baylands?
Yeah, I think we would, it's not really specified, but I think we would interpret it to mean, along existing trails in general.
Okay.
On the parcel.
Is there anything in the, so when did you want to add a condition of approval?
I just wanted to be clear what we're approving. We have the staff report's general description, we have the plans, and we have the Baylands interpretive project description. So where is the specificity here? This says along 2.5 miles of multi-use trails in the Bayland and existing boardwalk, and if you want it for more than that part of the, does that cover all the trails, that 2.5 miles? I don't think so.
It covers the scope of what we've outlined as the connection between the two interpretive centers. There are other interpretive signs out in the Baylands, and the rangers generally take on the task of designing those. This one's a little bit different because of the nature centers and the fact that the education staff that manages programs got involved in designing them. I work at the Junior Museum. We do a lot of signage, and so we applied our expertise to this as well. And this is really a test case that if this goes well, the rangers, the open space district may say, gosh, this is a success, let's do more of it. But for the purpose of this project, I think this 97 to 125 signs on these trails is sufficient.
Fine, and that's what we described in the public notice, so that's probably a good idea. So would somebody like to make a motion to approve this with the raising the number of permitted signs in this area to 125? Or as it was originally presented?
Okay, I move that we approve this project as presented with the additional raising of the maximum number of signs to 125.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously, thank you. Never let it be said that we don't quickly and speedily and happily approve a city project. All right, our next item is a public hearing concerning the property at 620 Emerson. It's to allow demolition of an existing single-story building and construction of a brand-new two-story, 4,256 square foot commercial building for the expansion of Nobu Restaurant. Nobu Restaurant is located in the adjacent hotel, which is on a separate parcel. The project also includes removal of 3 on-site parking spaces to be compensated for with the payment of 5 in lieu spaces, is that what it says? 5 in lieu spaces in the downtown parking assessment district. Staff. Oh.
Yes, thank you. Just one moment.
Sorry, just a minute. Does anybody have any outside conversations or inspections to disclose?
Yes, I'd like to disclose that I spoke by telephone with Elizabeth Wong regarding this project. She informed me essentially the information that's in the letter we all received. She also informed me that she's involved in a civil lawsuit with the owners of the property.
Anybody else? I think we've all inspected the site.
Good morning to the board. My name is Samuel Gutierrez. I'm a project planner for this project here at 620 Emerson. And we could start the presentation here. You could see a rendering of the proposed building. This is the existing building that's on site. It's the former home of the Palo Alto, or excuse me, the Stanford Florist flower shop. And again, that's the proposed building that's going to replace it. So going into the project overview, the demolition of the existing building, which is approximately 4,000 square feet, with the construction of a new building, which is submitted to be 4240. And the purpose of that is to expand the existing Nobu restaurant, which is located at 180 Hamilton, the adjacent building, the ground floor of the hotel there. It would include a new trash room. The current building does not have a trash room that would be remotely sufficient for a restaurant use, so this would house the additional waste receptacles that a restaurant would require. Also, it would have a green roof in the front portion of the building, and it provides clever hidden panels that would obscure the view of these backflow preventers that would be needed, as the new building would require fire prevention, sprinkler backflow preventers and kitchen backflow preventers. The proposal also includes 2 trees that would be within planter boxes in the public right-of-way made of teak. However, as submitted, the project is over its FAR for the site. I'll get into that in the next slide. The parking right now existing is 3 on site. It's actually accessed via the rear alley, not through the Emerson frontage. It's accessed in the rear through a roll-up garage door. And it has currently 11 in lieu spaces once it was assessed. The proposed building has 0 on-site parking and would actually require 4 in lieu spaces. The staff report does say 5, but again, it's over the FAR as submitted, and I'll get into that next. And it does require 2 bicycle racks to be included. So going over the FAR, initially it was submitted with the intent to get this 200 square foot bonus that's allowed in the downtown area. for projects that don't qualify for seismic rehabilitation or historic. As this is a new building, it doesn't qualify. So the maximum FAR for the site is the 1-to-1 ratio allowed by the zoning. They could not get that. So that would result in the removal of the storage room that's proposed on the second floor, so they don't exceed the allowed FAR. And additionally, the staircase would count twice. But again, with the removal of the storage room, that would be reconfigured and they would have to comply with the maximum allowed FAR on site. And going into the parking in lieu, there's a provision in the code under 181890D that a new building is eligible to participate in the lieu parking program as it meets the following criteria as determined by the Director of Planning. The site is less than 10,000 square feet, but such an unusual configuration that would not be physically feasible to provide the required parking on site. The existing parking is from when the original building was constructed, so it doesn't meet today's standards, so they're legal non-conforming. And the new building would have to have conforming parking to today's standards. So just briefly touching on the rationale for the findings for these in lieu spaces. The parking's in the rear is encouraged in the city's design criteria, and the parking in the front would negatively impact pedestrians. So if we had to do a curb cut or something in the front that doesn't exist right now along Emerson, that would impact pedestrians. For example, the rear portion of the parking has limited access because of the alley is actually undersized. For different parking configurations, we require some minimum distances, and the alley is a one-way alley, and it's actually under the required amount. And the required amount is usually about 25 feet, depending on the angle, and the alley is just barely 20 feet wide. Also, the requirement for the trash enclosure for the new building, that door needs to be accessible at all times. It cannot be blocked by a parking space, so it needs to be readily accessible by the alley. And again, that door needs to accommodate access for the large waste bins that would be pulled in and out as they're being picked up. The alley, again, is also narrow, so the backup is a bit of an issue because they would be backing into other parking spaces. There are some parking spaces that are angled along the alley as you enter and get to the corner, which I'll show in the next slide. And then again, the narrowness of the lot requiring a ramp for underground parking would make it a little difficult. You have to have certain slopes, and having a ramp to go in and then having circulation underground parking would be a bit difficult. And it could lead to the requirement of a curb cut again on Emerson, so a down, in, and then out on Emerson configuration. And if the parking was accommodated on site, let's say we could get a limited number of spaces, it's still difficult given the need for that trash room to be readily accessible. And again, we have a need for there to be egress exit for the size of the building and the use, so they could safely exit the building in case of an emergency at the rear. So these are a bit of the an example of the parking analysis that we did. So you can see here that we have angled parking. This is about 60-degree parking. And there's one space on the bottom portion of this example that could physically fit just the space alone. However, we would be backing into the parking space on the adjacent parcel highlighted there in the yellow, that's also angled. If you could see right there, you could also see that there is a light pole, there's a tree, and there is a utilities box in that area as well. And that area indicated in yellow as it kind of swoops down, there's a little appendix to it. That's also a separate parcel. So in this configuration, we see that there's just a lot of issues with this type of parking. So we found that that one couldn't be feasible. Moving to the next one, this is a 90-degree parking. You could just drive down the alley and park. To meet the 4 required that I mentioned based on the maximum FAR, We would have one driving into that light pole, the tree, and the parking space on private property. And then we have another one partially driving over private property. And then the furthest one down would actually need the 25-foot width of an alley, and we don't have that there to safely back out. And then the one in right above the bottom parking stall could potentially work as well, but then we have, again, the issue of the trash enclosure room door needing to be readily accessible and the egress exit as well. So these are a bit of the examples of the traffic analysis and circulation that we did, that we've met those findings and recommended that they use in lieu spaces rather than on site. So moving on to the context, we can see on the upper picture there on the left, it's a view down Emerson. The buildings are roughly 1 story. I believe a few of them have a mezzanine floor as you go into them, but they're about 24 feet tall. And you can see on the middle picture there, it's the historic building that's directly adjacent to the site. It does have the very nice terracotta facade. And then on the bottom, you can see the 620 Emerson rendering and how it connects to the corner 180 Hamilton building, just so you could get a bit of a context of the neighborhood. So just circling back to the other context is the alleyway conditions and the need for this trash enclosure. You can see the light pole on the left, the tree, a bollard for that utility equipment, and currently where they store their trash on site. So that would be an area that couldn't work for parking, for example, and also is problematic for the trash door. And then you can see the roll-up door currently, how they access the parking on site. And then further down the alley, you can see all the other waste receptacles there. So this would actually remove waste receptacles from the alley and put them inside an enclosure, which is going to meet other city requirements such as stormwater protection as well. So with everything taken into consideration and the FAR issue, pointed out and that they'd have to remove it, staff would recommend approval. Staff recommends that the board approves the project to the Director of Planning and the Community Environment based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions before we hear from the applicant? Could we hear from the applicant?
Thank you.
Good morning. You have 10 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Greg Studheit. I'm with Montalba Architects, and thank you for having me here again. It's good to see you guys to discuss the construction of our new restaurant at 620 Emerson Street. Oops, just click through here. So this is the site as it exists right now. You can see it's in the space of the building currently locally known as the Stanford Florist Building. It's roughly, as Samuel said, 24 feet in height and aligns pretty much with the building to the southeast here. And then on the other side abuts the hotel building, which is quite a bit taller, with the exception of this little sort of slot in between of balconies on the second floor. So it's the proposal that we have is to basically create the same massing, so low scale, pretty much aligning with the buildings that are there to the southeast. Our proposed facade maintains the massing and pedestrian scale of the street. The materials that we're using are intended to render the facade in a way that complements the facade of the hotel next door, but also provides a little bit of a difference between the two. we're incorporating this canopy element that continues sort of from the building next door across the front of the facade. The entry is recessed here in the middle, and then along the street we have two large windows which link the interior activity of the dining room with the street. Here you can see the building floor plan. It's oriented similar to what you might expect. There's the public dining room in the front with that link to the street facade. Kitchen a little further back with this kind of sushi bar in between. And then services are in the rear, accessed off the public alley in the rear. So zooming in on the facade here a little bit, we're trying to keep the facade fairly clean. We're using stone materials that are similar to the new building materials, which we've spoken of before on the hotel, only maybe a little more subdued. We have this kind of soft light across the top, and then the entryway is sort of backed with this textured accent stone that draws your attention into that entry. And it's all set off with this bronze canopy and then these kind of warm touches of wood finish and bronze accents. So if I flip to the next slide, here's some just kind of quick views of looking both directions from the street of the entry and the glass windows. So again, similarly to the facade next door, the lighting concepts are intended to accentuate the materials and textures of the building. This kind of soft light at the upper portion, and then a wash of light here at the entry that accentuates the rough stone finish, kind of pulls people into the entry and then redirects them to the entry door to the right here. And then just general downlighting along the underside of the canopy. So our proposal also includes upgrades to the existing sidewalk. Though minor, we are proposing to replace the sidewalk in front of the building. We are leaving the two street trees in place. There's one here, and then there's one slightly offset from our property. Those will be protected in place. And then we're suggesting these two little planter boxes with some ornamental planting in them just to kind of liven things up and draw a little bit of excitement and attention to the facade. So you can see in this slide just kind of a summary of the materials that we're proposing to use. There's the rich kind of oil-rubbed bronze material along the top here. A smooth stone finish that kind of goes around the sides and up and over the top. This textured stone at the entryway, and then these kind of accents of wood finish. The next slide is a little bit of a preview of the interior of the building. So this is the main dining room. We have these kind of central planters that are sort of a focal point to the room, and this skylight that runs along the center of the room that draws light into the space, and also suggests a little hint of the connection to the rooftop. So if I go to the next slide here, we're suggesting that this half of the roof is this sort of, we call it a rooftop garden. It's mainly experienced actually from the building next door, kind of looking down on it, as well as the second floor opens up to this balcony area that provides views of the Japanese-inspired landscaping in that area. So this is just a conceptual rendering of that experience. You can see here stone finishing, which kind of draws back memories of the stone facade in the ground floor, and accents of richer stone, wood materials and bronze. So except for the perusing the menu, I think that's kind of the experience of our project. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. We have some comment cards from the public. The first speaker will be Jeff Levinsky, to be followed by Daniel Myers, to be followed by Elizabeth Wong.
Good morning again, board, and, oops.
And of course, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning again. I'd like to first point out that in the past, plans for the project have been available for the public to view during the meeting, and I didn't see any at the table nor are any posted on the bulletin board, and I don't know if that's part of state law for open meetings as a requirement, but I'd like it noted. The second is that in the plans, as far as I've examined them, we still don't get good square footage numbers. In the past, there's been tables that show how many square feet on each floor and so forth. So I'm guessing that maybe this will come back and you'll be able to ask that that be included in the plans. As to the issue about the in lieu parking, it is quite a serious issue. The language of the municipal code requires that the exemption be given if it is not physically feasible to provide the required on-site parking. It doesn't say if it's convenient. It doesn't say that it has to be easy for the cars to get in and out necessarily, or it save as much square footage of the site for other uses. It says physically feasible. So, and I didn't see in any of the layouts presented the possibility of a garage opening and then there would be further parking on inside. I realize that would compromise the square footage of the restaurant area, but that's not what the code is saying you should be considering. It says, is it feasible physically for the site to accommodate the parking? Ditto for the garage, for the trash area, such there could be an arrangement by which the trash and the garage entrance are there in the alley. I think that would work from the slides that you were shown. There's another concern about in lieu, which I think has been overlooked. And this was confirmed by a city council member whom I spoke with about this at some point. What it says in the code is, in connection with any expansion of the supply of public parking spaces within the commercial downtown district, the city shall allocate a number of spaces for use as in lieu parking spaces. That's different than the downtown assessment district. There was a little confusion, I think, in staff's comments a moment ago about that. The question is, where are this inventory of in lieu spaces that this project wants to buy a share of? Where is that inventory? Has it been managed? The concern is that there is no inventory, that there are no in lieu parking spaces, and that a check is written but no parking ever materializes. So I think that should be addressed legally as to whether or not the whole way the in lieu program is being used in this case actually conforms with the municipal code. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel Myers? That's for the transcriber, that's M-Y-E-R-S?
That is correct. Good morning, and I'm totally unprepared for this. I'm representing Adolf Koenigsreiter, who is married to Ruth Kruger Koenigsreiter, who ran the flower shop at Stanford Florists for 50 years total. They acquired the building in 1978 and ran the flower shop business there from that time. I had difficulty finding information about this item, both from the planning department and from Mr. What's-his-face here. And I sent you 2 emails, rather extensive, with some objections. And I don't want to really repeat too much of that. The matter's in litigation. I want to limit my comments because the matter is in litigation, and I don't want to say anything that might reflect on litigation that, hasn't been said in the litigation. But as Mrs. Wong here is about to say, that there is a litigation involving her, involving the people who are claiming ownership right now, who possess the building, who instituted this planning proposal. And then there are us, Mr. Koenigsreiter and myself, and I'm one of the trustees of the Koenigsreiter estate. There's a lis pendens on the property, and that's a notice to everybody that anybody who has to deal with the property is notified that there is litigation. This should be reason enough to postpone any decision on this architectural proposal. I realize that I'm dealing with 4 architects, 1 lawyer. Is that correct? Your bias might be in favor of the architects getting their fees and stuff, but no, don't buy it. I doubt Mr. Ellison is personally involved in this. It's more likely his right-hand investment person. His name is Paul Marinelli. He's the guy who doles out $20,000 at a time, and I think that's what's driving this proposal here. Just flashing money, flashing $9,000 in city fees for the application. I don't know how much these guys got, or whether it's on contingency or whatever, but I presume it's not. And watch your butts, because.
Finish your thought.
Oh, because you can be in hot water too, because if there is some sort of investigation about the money trails in this, you don't want to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Wong.
I have a handout to give out.
They'll bring it up. And Samuel, is it possible to get the plans up on the wall?
Yes, I have copies of that.
Could you get it up so people can see it? Or put it on the table, one or the other?
Thank you.
This is from you, Elizabeth, dated February 1st?
Yes, it
Thank
is.
you. I think we all have
Yes, the
copies.
staff did put that on the dais earlier this morning.
Okay, good morning, members of the ARB. My name is Elizabeth Wong. I am here on behalf of Yo LLC. I'm also Palo Alto. I live here. I vote here. I care very much about Palo Alto. Since I have limited time, I'm going to just bring up a few things on this. The objections of Yo LLC to the ARB approval of this application are mainly 3. Yo has a contract to purchase the property which predates applicant's ownership of this property. Approval of this application and the proposed demolition and development work proposed to follow may have to be reversed depending on the outcome of the pending litigation. Yo LLC objects to the elimination of the existing parking areas on the property by construction of a building which eliminates such parking. Yo LLC objects because the proposed condition of approval do not fully incorporate the obligations of the applicant to restore the subject building with compliant bathrooms if there is a change of ownership of the 620 Emerson property, as set forth in the letter at page 61 of the ARB packet. Okay, I want to make some comments on the reason why this letter was not given to you before is because the attachments were received by me at 5:31 p.m. yesterday, and subsequently I spent all my time working on this letter. So I did not have this letter before, February 1st, today. Okay, so related to the the alley being substandard. 20 feet alleys is the standard in Palo Alto, one way. Okay, there's one behind one, there are two behind two of my buildings. So if we were to give the same reasoning for allowing the elimination of on-site parking, we would be eliminating thousands of parking spaces from the city, from the city's inventory of parking. Okay, the law, okay, so I feel betrayed by the fact that they had this study done on the parking and not given it to me until 5:31 last night. Okay, so apparently the law stipulates that you need to have a little bit more than 20 feet in order to make a 20-degree turn. Well, I think it's about 23 feet. So for the applicant to only lose 3 feet in order to accommodate the parking, to me, it's a non-issue. So,
finish your thought.
Okay, so another big deal is the loading zones. This building has 3 parking spaces that has been used for the last at least 3 or 4 decades as loading zones for that building. A restaurant requires a tremendous amount of loading space, and there's no loading zone at all. There's only a loading zone on Hamilton for to load the passengers.
I think we've all inspected the site in the vicinity. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to this? Commissioner, I always forget whether it's commissioner or board member. Martin Bernstein.
Thank you, Chair Firth and board and staff. Martin Bernstein. I live in the Shoki residence in the alley directly behind Noble Restaurant. I've spoken with Noble staff and some of their design team, and I find them very professional and courteous. And I'd like to speak just briefly about the proposed design of the project. I support the project the way it looks. I see that they're very sensitive to the residences in the alley, such as the roof garden is protected by a wall and the mechanical equipment between that roof garden and then my residence. My bedroom's up on the second floor, so I have a direct view of that, so I appreciate the fact that the roof garden is protected in that sense from noise and vision. One of the conditions of approval I would like to suggest that you include is for the trash bins on the enclosures on the ground floor, to have that to be a locked door. I've been in this neighborhood for about 30 years now. When the Cadillacs come along, a Cadillac is a shopping cart. I speak often with the people who come around at about 2:30, 3 in the morning to pick up recycling materials for resale. They're fine people. I like them. But at 2:30 and 3 in the morning, when the shopping carts or the Cadillacs come through the bumping of the alley with the cans and bottles, it disturbs sleep. So what I find is that if that trash area can be locked, then that would just curtail, at least on that property. I know there are other properties in through the alley, but we're talking about 620 Emerson. So if that could be a condition, that'd be great. And then also just the standard conditions of any lighting in the back, that the lights stay on the, don't intrude onto my property, or the windows at least, my bedroom windows. And that'd be my request. But I'm in support of the design. I think they're wonderful designers, and I think it'd be really a great attraction in the neighborhood to have the street facade and the alley facade cleaned up the way they're proposing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? The applicant like to speak? You have another 10 minutes. Okay, the applicant declines. Anything from staff?
No, not at this moment.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I've got a couple. seeing as though this is an addition to the existing restaurant that's already there, I guess this is a stupid question, but is this going to be the main front entrance to the restaurant when it's done? I don't care who answers it, but...
Actually, the restaurant is sort of an extension to the restaurant next door, but it's also sort of a complementary extension to the restaurant next door. So it's maybe not, maybe don't think of it as the same restaurant, but perhaps like a sister location, if you will. But yes, for this location, this would be the main entrance into the restaurant.
Okay. And then also, seeing as though you've got, what, 8 or 9 floors of balconies going right up the side of that, you have is that going to be the location for the exhaust fan for the kitchen? So some poor guy who rents a room on the 3rd floor or something is going to be listening to that or looking at that the whole time?
Yes, I mean, we'll be, working to...
Okay, there has been some consideration, seeing as though if they're going to be owned by the same person, to run it through the hotel and up?
Through the hotel. Technically, I think that's probably not possible.
Okay.
Just because of some of the conditions on the site.
Let's see.
If I may, I do want to be clear that we're dealing with 2 different properties here. The hotel is on one property, and this restaurant annex is on a second property. So we are looking at this. There are some interconnections, some internal connections.
No, I understand that. I understand that.
However, we need to plan that if they were to be separated at a later date, we need to anticipate that.
Right. Okay. So that's all I have for questions.
Alex?
Okay, I have a couple questions for you. I guess one for staff maybe. Is the trees that are proposed on the sidewalk in the front, did the city look at the clearance between the street tree and the proposed planters? Like sometimes I've heard a number called out, I think staff on other projects, they said they wanted like 8 feet of walking space, and I was looking at this one and thinking maybe down to like 5 feet between the street tree and then this proposed planter.
Yes, that was reviewed by Public Works Engineering, and they didn't see any issues with it because those planters would be staggered from the next, I guess you could say, obstruction to the sidewalk, which would be the existing planted street trees. And those planters aren't fixed. I mean, they're movable. So, they could be placed closer to the entry where they would be less likely to be an obstacle for pedestrians.
Okay, great. And then on the roof garden design, I was wondering if you could, if you had any insights on the landscape design, just like on the plant selection. There's like a long, I mean, it's a sod, yeah, there's like it's a pretty eclectic. You had mentioned like a Japanese garden, but I see like bougainvillea and sod lawn and philodendrons. It's like, yeah, it's very unusual.
The intent is that it would be more along the lines of a Japanese garden with, perhaps some rock features and gravel and as well as, off the top of my head, Japanese elm, or sorry, not elm, palm
Japanese
tree
maples
or whatever, yeah.
Is stormwater treatment part of the landscape design? Is that a critical component of it?
Our understanding is that we can't solely use the garden to treat the landscape, the runoff water. So we do have a separate treatment facility on site. But yes, I mean, the water that lands on the garden is running through the garden and then into that filtration system.
Okay, and then I was looking at the lighting plans and I didn't see any light fixtures in the alley. What are your thoughts about that area?
We're not planning on having a lot of lighting in the alley, just what's necessary for the trash room and the trash.
So there's an existing pole light, I think it was mentioned, and so that is that's adequate?
No, actually, that existing light fixture would remain. It's not on our property, it's on the neighbor's property.
It's on the site. Yeah, it's on the site plan. I'm not sure which neighbor it is.
If I may, it's on, I believe the property address is 164 Hamilton.
Yes.
That's where the street light pole is.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no other questions.
Osma?
You said there would be stormwater treatment on site. Where is that in the plans?
It's like an in-ground filtration box, so it's located more towards the back of the site, but it's underground essentially. So
Okay.
what you see is a manhole cover from above.
Okay. And then will there be signage on the front?
Yes, we haven't submitted for the signage. We're not, as I said before, it's not necessarily going to be called quote unquote Nobu, and so without being sure exactly what it is, we haven't submitted for that yet.
That's all my questions.
Peter?
I'm afraid, if the chair will indulge me, I have quite a few questions. I frankly find the application just really lacking in giving us enough information. So, simple ones to the architect. The front canopy you're proposing over the front of the restaurant, I can't tell, or I don't remember, is it the same material and the same configuration as the canopy coming across the Epiphany Hotel?
It is, well, I guess it is the same material, but in that it's a metallic material, but it is intended to be rendered in a different way so that there is some separation between the two buildings, so they're kind of the same but different, if you will.
So to be more clear, because I thought the hotel had a wooden finish.
Yes, it's got a faux wood finish.
So wood and bronze are not the same material, rendering or not, to be clear.
Correct, except
Okay.
that what is on the existing hotel is a faux wood. It's actually metal, but
the proposal for the hotel is wood, and the proposal for this restaurant is metal. Are they the same geometry, the same, are they flushed with each other, and are they the same vertical height?
yes.
Okay, so the only difference is the material, really, from a visual point of view.
Yes.
Second question for you, please, is regarding the purpose of the garden roof hotel and its relation to the existing hotel. Are they at the same level, and is there any intention to be able to physically go between the spaces?
The intent is not to physically go between the spaces. No, there is a little bit of an elevation change.
Do you know
between the two,
how much of an elevation change?
I think it's 18, 20 inches, somewhere in that range.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions for the architect. If the chair is willing to indulge me, I wonder if it's possible to call Martin Bernstein up and ask him to give us his opinion about the viability of parking or how parking works in that building right now. My understanding is that there's parking in that building that's functioning at the moment. If Martin Bernstein is a respected member of the community who lives very nearby,
You can ask a member of the public to answer a specific question, yes.
if he's willing to help us, I'd appreciate hearing him. Through the Martin Bernstein is who I'd like to speak to about it.
Mr. Bernstein, you may speak in response to the question.
Hi, thank you, Chair Firth. Mr. Balte, go ahead.
Can you shed any light on how the parking in that building works right now? Is it viable parking in the back of that building, and is it possible to have parking there, in your opinion?
When Stanford Florist was the occupant of the building, there was a 3-car garage door that would open up, roll-up door, and then there were often Stanford Florist personnel vehicles in there. They would drive in, and then to drive in front, forward, or reversed, and then they come in like the alley's one way, heads southeast direction. So then they would just back up and then go like that. Yeah. So it's been functional for Stanford Florist.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, just as a courtesy, Mr. Myers, did you want to add anything specifically on the point of parking?
Yes. I was working there, and I know everything about it that he doesn't. It's actually 2 cars that fit in the building there. It's a 2-car kind of garage partition. There's a partition wall between the storefront and the parking garage, and in the parking garage part, there's the door to the door to the storeroom rather, and then there's a little ladder that goes up to an attic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that answers our questions. Thank you. Whoops, we need to stop this. You have a closing remark?
Yeah, I agree because there's a little restroom in there. So actually, even though it's wide enough for 3 cars, because there's an existing restroom in there, there are room for 2 vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm good. I think we're good. 2 vehicles
Got it,
worked
right.
historically on this premises. Thank you for your help.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have questions of staff?
And the last questions I have are for the staff directly. Essentially, 2 things. One is the applicant's proposing to build a restaurant there without any restrooms. And as I understand it, that's because they're going to connect the building to the adjacent site. But how should we interpret that from a code, from an architectural review point of view? It's very abnormal to have a building with no restrooms. Is that something we can say is a non-functional hotel? What are we supposed to say about that?
So yes, it is a bit of an unusual situation. It's not typical, but because we have these, co-functioning businesses and property owner and leasee or what have you, in the plans you can see there's an alternative scenario floor plan that actually includes restrooms. The project does include a coven that is being worked on right now between the city and the property owner. Should the business cease to function in conjunction with the adjacent hotel for any reason, then the proposed openings between the buildings would be sealed, and then the actual 620 property would need to be a standalone building. So those bathrooms would need to be constructed. So they'll need to plummet for bathrooms, be ready for that in the likelihood of that scenario, and that's how we address that issue.
Okay, and lastly, there's been a number of comments from the community regarding the ownership of the property. Is that something that you can shed any more light on, or has the staff checked there's a bona fide title to this property by the applicant? What should we do about that? How do we react to it?
So yes, we looked into that. Of course, when the application was submitted, the property owner who signed for it is the legal property owner, as we understand it. We checked again when this issue was brought up again, just in case for some reason the records had changed, unbeknownst to us. They had not. It is still the same property owner, the PA Hotel Holdings LLC. Now, as far as this application for architectural review, it wouldn't be an issue. We haven't received any injunctions by a court or anything to stop any proceedings. It's a civil matter between private parties, as we understand it. Should something be issued, of course we'd stop. But even if the board were to approve, it wouldn't cause any undue harm to anyone because it's merely the design approval. There is no demolition permit being issued. There's no building permit being issued at this time. So that's how we vetted that situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is pedestrian overlay. And how is this design addressing those requirements?
So the design has the awning, which creates a pedestrian refuge. That's the first part. The second part is that the design does have a large storefront that you could see clearly into the building, so that connects the store into it. And then the recessed entry is also another feature that we'd like to have to make it more pedestrian friendly. Again, it's that refuge. It's drawing people into the business, and that's a part of the pedestrian overlay. And then, of course, the suggestion of the planter boxes in the front, add some green kind of landscaping to the sidewalk, apart from the street trees that exist there.
Now remind me, when we concluded with the review of the hotel remodel, did we accept that without any seating anywhere?
We had options to add seating, should the applicant choose to, and that would be handled by staff. So that was the board's decision. It was the amendment to the conditions.
And have we heard what they plan to do?
As of yet, no.
Thank you. Okay. Just before we start the larger discussion, I will say that in my experience, Samuel's analysis is correct with regard to the civil litigation. Even the fact that there's a lis pendens, a notice to the world that there is litigation concerning title, doesn't permit the city to not review an application. We're still subject to the laws that require us to consider an application, and only if and when we get a court order, an injunction, can we stop and hold it up. So we aren't able to not consider this because of the complicated and obviously distressing for many people history of the ownership of this property. So having said that, why don't we start with you, Uzma?
So in terms of what's been said, well, maybe I'll back up a little bit. The facade is quite blank right now. It's partially why I asked about signage, but even the addition of the planters as separate entities seem potential VE items. I would almost prefer that they're more integrated in the facade of the design in some way. As they stand right now, they could easily be pushed around, and given that it is sort of the green life of this of the facade right now, so one of the few things adding life to the facade right now, it seems to me that it might be important to consider integrating those into the facade. I think for now, those are my comments. Yeah, that it's blank and it could use a little bit more, but also the brow, potentially, I can see that you've attempted to connect to the building that's the hotel, but there is also the building adjacent to you, that's the historic building. While you've respected the height and matched that, there are very little else that connects those, and so I wonder if there could be more attention paid to that. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. I will start with the aesthetic part of it. Contrary to my fellow board member, I find the facade attractive and well-designed, and I think it'll be an elegant addition to the neighborhood. I find that just by massing the height of the building to the left, it does a lot to tie it in. I think having the awning relate to the building to the right helps tie it in. And overall, I find that the design will make an attractive presentation on the street and a benefit to the neighborhood. My issue on the facade has to do with the awning piece itself, however. Somehow to me, if it's the same size and shape and projection, but a different material to the hotel next door, it's really sending a mixed signal. Is it or isn't it the same hotel, same restaurant? And I guess that's maybe symbolic of the whole problem here. The big question for you guys, is this part of Nobu or is it not? Do you need the bathrooms or don't you? A lot of these questions are coming out of this vagarity, which hasn't been answered, and I think you're not going to get far until that question is answered. In my mind, at least, I think the awning should match exactly the hotel. If the restaurant is the same also, it just ties it all together. Certainly if it's different just by material, I'm not buying it. It's too subtle a difference. On a nitpicking point, the way your detail on sheet, let's see, detail 11 on 5.10, you've got the top of that awning sloped ever so slightly away from the building, so water will drip off. And correct me if I'm wrong, but oil rub bronze with water slowly rolling off of it all winter long is going to look terrible real quick. and that's not what you're thinking about. You've got to handle that kind of detailing better. We're not in Los Angeles here. It really won't work. You've got a little recess for the light fixture behind it, which is, unless you put some drain features in there, is going to short circuit it real quick. It's not a thought through detail yet, and yet it's critical, the only element animating that facade. So again, I'm afraid it just needs a little more revision on that, so I'm sure you'd catch those as you go through it. I'm concerned at a higher level, and I think it's not ready for approval yet, but the floor area count is not correct. It just hasn't been, the math hasn't been done, period. There's nothing in the plans showing it. And when I do the math myself, it doesn't work. The floor areas don't add up any which way. But I'm also concerned about that garden roof, and I'd like to see a cross-section between the garden roof and the adjacent hotel to get some understanding of if that is intended to be an outdoor patio for the hotel. That should be made part of the application. And if it's not, I'd like to see what the relationship is between the two spaces. It just seems awfully funny to me to go through that much effort to build a garden roof like that and then not have it be really beneficial to somebody like the hotel. And additionally, as staff alluded, we can just modify the floor area a little bit, but it seems to me these are big modifications. Taking off that second floor or leaving it on. There's some spaces on there that don't seem to be counted quite correctly. So a lot of changes, I think, need to take place to get the floor area to work. I'd like to just not comment further on the parking issues now. I think the comments from the community and the staff and other people we've asked have made it pretty clear that the staff needs to very, very well document the rationale behind this exemption. And I'm not going to comment beyond that. But I will comment on the floor plan layout regarding the bathrooms, because what's there now, putting in restrooms in that building doesn't work. It's not a logical place for restrooms in a restaurant just inside the front door next to the dining room like that. What it is just a quick solution to try to simplify it, to show staff what's going on, and it really doesn't cut it, because I think you need a really good answer. If you're going to have bathrooms there, show us how it's really going to be done. It will affect all the other stuff in the back of the building, which is what we've been talking about. So in a nutshell, I'm not close to being able to recommend it for approval, but I think your design on the facade is good, and it can be close to that. Thank you.
Alex.
Great. So thank you for the submittal. I find the renderings are very attractive. In my mind, it seems like it's a missed. There's a missed opportunity, which would be to have a taller storefront windows that would match the neighbor in the existing building. That's like, to me, that's like the character defining element on Emerson. And then I do look at the rooftop garden and what you're trying to do with the hotel. And so I think I understand the rationale behind it. So I think I could live with that. I think the main issues that I have is probably the square footage diagrams that Mr. Levinsky had mentioned. I think I agree with Mr. Bernstein on adding a condition for the locked trash area. I think I would like a submittal for the glass storefront facing Emerson. I realize that sometimes that comes in later after like building submittals and whatnot. And I'm having some trouble with the roof garden planting plan as shown. I don't even really understand it in concept or detail. So I think I would like to revisit, in a way I would like to revisit that. I'm not sure it would meet our finding number 5, but I think I'll give you leeway because it is a roof garden. It's something very different. And I think I understand it's like in a hotel, the garden would need to look good all year round. And like a lot of our native plants don't do that. So I think some flexibility is warranted for the roof garden. And then if we are getting down to, well, we'll see where the board is, but if we are getting down to findings, I think I have some issues with findings number 5 and 6 with regard to, well, let me back up. For 5, which is the roof garden, and having like a lawn up on the roof, is going to require like a huge amount of water, and I don't think those are native plants. Finding number 6, which is mostly about sustainable design, I think that it's mentioning like stone and wood as being sustainable materials, and that's not necessarily true. So like shipping in marble from Italy is not considered environmentally preferable. You want to keep it within, what is the standard? It's like 300. For LEED, I think it's there's a, whatever, like a 200-foot radius where you try to use locally quarried stone to reduce the impact of shipping. And same with wood, we try to minimize the use of wood wherever possible. And then with regard to green roofs, I've been taught that like a planted roof is not really the most sustainable design element for this particular climate. We get all of our rain in a very short amount of time, and then we have a long drought, and having a green roof, you're actually using a lot of water, and it's not capturing enough water in our little short window of rain. So I think my recommendation would be to exclude that from the findings. I think it's perfectly fine to have a garden. I think that meets our downtown design guidelines, but I would just, I would exclude it. So that's all that I have. I'm generally in support of the project, but I think there are lingering issues.
Robert.
Okay, I was a bit confused about this project, just the way the whole thing's presented. I was initially under the thought that maybe the intent was to remove the property line between the two properties and have the thing become part of the hotel. Then I could understand where having the restrooms in the hotel itself would function fine, and there wouldn't be an issue. I find it very strange to design a restaurant that doesn't have any restrooms in it, I'm sorry, even if you're going to plumb for the future in an area that really doesn't work, as I agree with my fellow board member. Then also the idea about the parking, I will address it a little bit. I've never been a fan of in lieu fees. There's sort of this magical X amount of dollars per parking spaces in this nebula of available parking in the city somewhere. If it was one of these that for your money you would get 6 parking spaces in the third level of parking lot A or whatever, that would be one thing. So to take 3 viable parking spaces out, I think is a strange approach, and I've actually never seen a city fight that hard to get rid of 3 parking spaces, as I heard from you today. It surprises me. Okay, so going back to that, also the idea of, as I mentioned, with the exhaust fan that is going to be basically right under some poor guy's window who spends probably a sizable amount of money to rent a room right there, and then I'm being told that, well, the areas may be separated into 2 separate parcels, and so that creates all kinds of problems. Okay, going on to sort of the design of it, it's a very subtle, well-done design. The only thing is that, and that's why I asked the question, is this going to be the front door? If you look at the facade, your first question is, how do I get in? It is so subtle that the doors are wrapped around the side. If you happen to walk by, you're going to assume that this is a restaurant that you have to enter through the hotel somehow to get into. At least that's what I would assume. You'd go through the entry door of the hotel to get to it. That's why I asked if they were all connected or not. I agree that, a 3-foot canopy is not really pedestrian friendly. That's just enough to stand there halfway and get half wet. And like I said, you can't even, it's not inviting to come in. Now maybe it's trying to be so subtle that it's a snob appeal aspect of the hotel or the restaurant, I don't know. But it just seems like it doesn't work with the whole concept of downtown, of a desirable entry, that it's easy to find the front door of a business establishment. So I think I'm way further behind some of my fellow members as far as finding this acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you for the submittal. I went and looked at this site again, including the alley, at about 6:30 this morning, and the sun's coming up and everything is bathed in a rosy glow and it all looks gorgeous. And I must say, there is a great green wall at the southern end of this alley. It's just ficus growing up and trimmed and maintained beautifully. And so when we get these green wall proposals, good gardeners can do it with the right exposure and enough soil. I have a number of concerns, though I do think it looks quite beautiful. One is not merging the parcels. And I can understand that given the state of play in these properties and the disputes about their ownership, that mergers may be impossible. But that means you have to think about what is and isn't possible. If the building department is willing to accept a break in the firewall between these two buildings, subject to recorded covenants that require that these be filled in at some point if they don't have joint operations, I think I can understand that. But I have real problems with thinking about how you're going to draft a document that authorizes us, that lets us make the finding that this building is designed for all its uses with no bathrooms on site. So I'd like to hear more about how you plan to do that. One of the problems is if the city has an affirmative covenant that requires somebody to go out and do something, those are hard to enforce. We're not going to go on the property. We're not going to build the bathrooms. And so it takes a lot of, usually you would require somebody to post a bond. So we had a cash bond for covering the cost, so they have an incentive to do it. But if we're going to make that finding that this property is properly developed for its intended purpose because of the security of its integration with the building next door, we need a lot of assurance. And I don't find the Plan B credible. I can't imagine a restaurant that's you're gonna walk into the bathrooms, and this is designed like City Hall. Every time you walk out of the bathroom, you walk right into a bunch of people, and we don't like the way City Hall works. So that needs to be, if we're going to approve it, it needs a better alternative plan. I don't think that works. I also don't think we have good square footage calculations, and we need to see what the building would look like if it were in compliance. The parking is really troubling. If, as Elizabeth Wong says, all our alleys are substandard, then that's standard downtown, and we don't want to inadvertently justify eliminating all those places for what might be phantom parking places because of that. This, if anything, would be a case for a design enhancement exception, and I got to admit, I'm not clear why you can't get a few additional feet by pulling the parking spaces further into the parcel. So I'm not yet persuaded that this is the best approach. I'm very, of course, in order to build, this is essentially an empty lot proposal we're looking at. And in order to build a restaurant there, you have to have an enclosed, secured space for trash removal. So that is going to be part of the design no matter what. And I may be persuaded that you can't get as many spaces as we would like on site, but I'm not persuaded that you can't get one or two or maybe even three. I also would like some understanding of how loading would work, because we know how it works at the hotel. That seems to be fine. But certainly loading on Emerson is already a problem. And it'd be nice to know how this would approach to do it, if it's possible to load from the rear as the Flores use did. I don't think this is pedestrian friendly. I think these projects can't be, one, when it comes to bathroom, and two, when it comes to pedestrian amenities. I think we need better pedestrian amenities on this portion of that integrated facade, and I think it needs to include seating somewhere. Robert's comments brought up something interesting, which is as it's designed, it's beautiful and it looks like a private club. And this is a pedestrian-oriented commercial district. It's supposed to be inviting. Secondly, when I first saw this elevation, which is beautiful, I was very concerned about how it would work with Mr. Keenan's restored historical building next door. And then this morning, I was looking at the light washing over, which I realized was quite pink, washing over Stanford Florist facade, and thought, this really does work. The buildings are the same height. You have this rather richly decorated building, and then you have this very plain building, and then you have this interesting hotel. I agree. So I think that something very pale can work. I'm not sure whether this is the right color. I think that some kind of creaminess, there is a color that's going to work really well on both directions. I don't know what it is. I don't know that we've seen it. And I share Alex's view that one of the characteristics, important characteristics of this block is this kind of exhilarating high windows. They really, literally, I mean, they give you a lift as you go by, and that it would be important, I think, to try to integrate that into this facade. Okay, so, yes, Alex.
Could staff clarify for me what the purview of the board with regard to parking and the bathrooms? Because to me, the bathrooms are an internal issue, and that's not in any of our ARB findings, except maybe in the most general sense that the design is functional.
Yes, I think you characterized that appropriately, that the building needs to function in general, but it's not necessarily the ARB's purview to be designing the interior space. And regarding the parking, that is a director's decision, as noted in the code. Just for, related to some of the questions that other members have had, the spaces that are currently there are legal non-conforming. So, if they were keeping the existing building and just doing a minor renovation, that would be one thing, but they're tearing the building down, and so therefore any new parking needs to meet current standards, and that's what we're having trouble, finding the appropriate dimensions for all of that. And the alley spaces, we can certainly look into all of this more, but the alley, in this particular situation, we would be sort of backing into this one-way alley, whereas in other parts of downtown, we have larger parcels that are able to, circulate on site and then come out of the property forward-facing. So those are some other restrictions that we're having here.
And I think it's also, to me, it's undesirable to have cars exiting on that one-way alley towards farther down on the block. To me, that's like a really nice pedestrian connection there on Bryant, and it seems to me preferable to remove parking in this particular situation.
Okay, well, you've heard a variety of comments, and I would agree that the relevant finding is the one about functional use of the building. Anybody want to make a motion? Or does staff have any recommendations on this topic? I've heard comments on needing good square footage calculations. I've heard comments on the landscaping, and I would agree that a Japanese garden with bougainvilleas is an interesting concept. I'm also concerned about, I presume the landscape architect has determined they're going to grow in that setting, but it's interesting given how shaded it's going to be. I am also concerned about, I didn't mention this, is how, I guess somebody mentioned this earlier, how the roof garden and the hotel relate, and whether, if this is accessible directly from the hotel, does this have any, does this additional outdoor social space have any impact on the approvals of the hotel? And if it doesn't, which is of course also a former PC, is it, Alex?
Oh,
or it's just a non-conforming use from long ago, I can't remember. Anyway, whether it would affect that, and if this needs to not be accessible from the hotel, how the design makes sure that it doesn't happen. I'm not clear how the gardeners get there at the moment. So square footage calculations, we've had some comments on the frontage. We've had some comments on how, we like some reassurance on how the city would secure just tell us that it's secure. With respect to the bathrooms, you've heard comments about trying harder to accommodate parking, particularly because we're concerned about the precedential nature of this. It may well be unique and different, in which case that needs to be well articulated. What am I forgetting, folks?
The locked trash
Oh,
door.
I'm always puzzled by continuing operating conditions under design review, but if we do that, certainly there's a good case that's been made that that should be secured in the evenings, or at least when it's not, at such times as it's not, doesn't need to be open for collection. Two of us have said we want better pedestrian accommodation. Anything else?
We have not talked about the, I don't think people have commented on the loading.
Right, we've expressed
the loading zone
concerns. What's the answer?
And also too, if there's any more definition about facade comments, I think we're hearing about the higher windows, which I agree is somewhat a pattern along this stretch of street. But were there anything else beyond that?
You heard conflicting comments. Well, there are two of us concerned about the opacity of the entrance.
I think the larger windows can actually work both ways. If you use it as this building becomes the transition between a 10-story building and a 2-story building, then it can be different. Otherwise, it just has the whole continuation bumping right into the high-rise. So that could be done, either way successfally. So I'm not really too worried about that aspect of it. I just don't think it's friendly enough as what it's. Like I said, I agree with your concept. It looks like a private club that you're allowed to look in the window but not come in.
Maybe there's consensus that it's unwelcoming.
That it's unwelcoming, yes.
And I think the staff report also was asking if the upper part of the facade is too blank. And I think I would agree if it were stucco, but they're proposing stone for the whole, two different kinds of stone for the whole thing, and they're illuminating it. So I think that's enough in my mind.
But part of it is also you've got a very busy building on each side, so a little bit of toned down area in the middle is probably not a bad thing.
I think I would tend to agree that. I mean, what really struck me looking at it this morning was that you have this rather ornate building, and then you have you catch your breath. And in fact, the Stanford Florist building has a much bigger, wider facade going way up from very low, and I think that works. And I think there is some material and some balance of proportions that doesn't need to be decorated. It can be quite plain and beautiful. That would give you that pause before you hit the hotel.
Let me bring up that what I saw in this, and I think it's different than what my colleagues are saying, is that this facade was an extension of the hotel, and it was trying to really pick up the same materials and the same canopy and feel integrated with the facade of the hotel. And I don't think they quite succeeded at that, but my interpretation is that that's what they were trying to do. Maybe it's worth other board members addressing. If they were to do that, would that be acceptable? Because what I've heard everybody say would preclude that.
And I thought about that when I first saw it, but the problem is quite often if you design a hotel and you have a lower portion, usually the scale here is just so small, I don't think it works. It's one of these, this to me is more of a wart on a larger building, rather than a connection. It's like, we ran out of space, so we're bumping out a little bit. It's just because of the sizes involved, I don't think it works.
Yeah, I also think that Despite that it might be connected to that hotel, that doesn't preclude it from the fact that it is adjacent to, another building that it needs to address. And so I think the higher storefront would actually make that top part feel less blank. So I think it is feeling blank. Maybe the signage might help, but not seeing that. If the windows were taller, then that would sort of give the scale a bit more palatability, I think.
I have no idea how it should be designed, but I know what I'm looking for, which is a welcoming building which gives the eye a pause between these decorated, much earlier buildings on a block that is fun to walk down because it has Richard Sumner and all these wonderful storefronts that give you frequent change. And I would not it should not, in my mind, look like an extension of the hotel. It should not look like the hotel is creeping down the block.
Or an extension of the other building.
No, it's neither. It's its own thing. And particularly, and that one more comment, and particularly if we're going to eliminate on-site parking, and that's going to depend on what staff and the director think, then I think if it takes pulling back portions of that facade to properly have greenery or benches or whatever, that should be done.
Okay, I'll move that we continue this project to a date uncertain, subject to the comments that have been made.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So motion by Board Member Balte, second by Board Member Gruyere. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 No opposed? It passes. We have approval of 42 pages of minutes or something like that. I'm sure you've all had a chance to review them. Let's see, was that your first meeting? Yeah, I think she should have the actual name of her place of architectural training in the minutes. It's a typographical error. But we usually just give you typographical comments off stage. Any corrections, additions? Corrections, I guess, is what we're looking for. None?
It seemed to me the biggest issue was just getting the names of the public speakers
Exactly.
recorded correctly. And so there were a lot of misspellings.
Right, and I will try to ask that people spell their name for the record in the future, but if we can do it from cards, it just doesn't seem to get integrated.
It's written on the speaker cards, so I think
Right.
it's just that we have to, but those don't go to the
It doesn't
transcriber.
work.
Correct.
She's offside. So it's not unusual to ask people to spell their name for the record, including the architects, I'm afraid. So I'll give you my typo corrections, but any substantive changes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I will make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Lou, second by Guyere. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. We are adjourned.